5 people you must avoid in old age, even family. And before I'm done tonight, I'll tell you exactly which one of the 5 nearly cost me my own health before I finally saw what was happening. Hello, wherever you are in the world. I am 81 years old. I've buried friends. I buried my wife. I retired from a career I gave 40 years to, and I've watched entire decades disappear like smoke through an open window. At this age, you stop pretending about life. You stop dressing pain up in pretty words. You finally say things honestly because time no longer feels endless. There are people who will take your peace without ever raising their voice. And in my experience, the hardest part is that many of them do not look harmful at first. Some look like love, some look like family, some look like duty. But over time, you begin to see the pattern. I want to walk you through the 5 kinds of people I personally had to distance myself from. I won't speak about them as theories. I'll speak about them in the order I learned them, through real consequences in my own life. Peace becomes more valuable than approval once you reach a certain age. I hope by the end of tonight you understand exactly why. This was the first one I had to face, and it took me the longest to accept what was actually happening, because manipulation doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives with urgency, with emotion, with what feels like responsibility. In my case, it was someone very close to me, someone I loved deeply, who always seemed to be standing at the edge of a crisis. Every call came with pressure. Every request felt like a final chance. There was always a problem only I could solve, and if I hesitated, the tone would shift into disappointment or fear or guilt. Over time, I stopped noticing that my decisions were no longer fully mine. I was reacting, not choosing. And what made it harder was that every time I helped, there was temporary relief, followed by another emergency. My life was being measured by someone else's instability. Only much later did I understand. Love does not require surrendering your entire sense of balance. When I finally stepped back, I didn't do it with anger. I simply stopped responding with immediate rescue. I learned to pause, to say no without a long explanation. And strangely enough, that space changed everything. Not instantly, but slowly, the pressure lifted and I began to breathe again. I want to be clear about something because I don't want you hearing this as never help anyone again. That's not it at all. The difference is simple, even if it doesn't feel simple in the moment. Helping someone through a genuine hardship has an end. You can see the shape of it, this problem, this season, this specific need. A manipulator's crisis has no shape. It just has a new name every few weeks. That's the tell. If you recognize someone in that first one, tell me in the comments. Just write the number 1. I want to know how many of you are further into this than you realized. After years of dealing with emotional pressure, I encountered a very different kind of person. Someone who doesn't necessarily ask for help, but who also never truly sees you. Conversations with them always circle back to themselves. At first I didn't mind. I thought it was just personality. But over time I noticed a quiet erosion happening inside me. I'd share something meaningful and it would get turned, redirected, or overshadowed by their own stories. Even my milestones became background noise to their narration of their own life. I remember sitting once with someone very close to me, realizing halfway through the conversation that I hadn't been asked a single real question about myself in a very long time. It wasn't dramatic, but it was clear. I was slowly disappearing inside my own relationships, so I made small adjustments. I shortened conversations, I stopped waiting for an acknowledgement that never came, and I started reclaiming space in the dialogue, not aggressively but firmly. If I was interrupted, I learned to simply continue my sentence anyway, uncomfortable at first, like breaking an unspoken rule. Then I realized the rule had never been mutual to begin with. Here's what surprised me most about this one. It wasn't dramatic to fix. Nobody had a confrontation. I didn't deliver a speech about how I felt unseen. I just slowly started taking up the room I was always entitled to. And the strange thing is, some of those relationships got better once I did that. Not all of them. But some people simply hadn't noticed the imbalance either. They'd just never been asked to notice. If any of this is landing, this is the moment to subscribe. I share what I've actually lived through, not what I've read somewhere. And there are 3 more of these tonight, including the one that hurt the most to learn. This one appears in a much quieter way, but with a very steady impact. This kind of person rarely raises their voice and often genuinely believes they're being helpful, which is exactly what makes them so hard to recognize. Their comments come disguised as advice, as concern, as experience, but the result is always the same. You begin to doubt yourself. In my life, this showed up in small remarks: how I lived, how I dressed, how I arranged my home, how I chose to spend my days after retirement. Nothing ever felt good enough in their eyes, even after a lifetime spent building stability for myself. At first I absorbed those words quietly. I'd replay them later, wondering if maybe they were right. That's the subtle damage of a constant critic. It doesn't break you immediately. It reshapes how you see yourself, slowly, over years. Eventually I understood something important. Not every opinion deserves a place in your inner world. Some words are just noise, even when they come from familiar voices, so I started responding differently. I stopped defending every choice. I stopped explaining my life as if it needed approval. I would simply acknowledge and keep living in my own direction, and the weight of those opinions began to lose its grip on me. Before I go on, let me give you something useful, because people ask me this constantly. How do you tell the difference between someone who loves you enough to be honest and someone who's just chronically critical? Real honesty is rare and specific. It shows up once when it matters, and it costs the other person something to say it. Chronic criticism is constant and vague. It shows up about everything, and it costs them nothing at all. If someone corrects you about your home, your clothes, your schedule, your friends, your hobbies, and somehow never once mentions anything they'd actually change about themselves, that's not honesty. That's just a habit wearing honesty's clothing. These people move through life leaving chaos behind them everywhere they go. Missed payments, broken promises, bad decisions, constant crises. And somehow they always expect somebody else to clean up the mess afterward. Many older people become targets for exactly this because younger relatives assume seniors have extra time, extra patience, extra savings. They see us as safety nets instead of human beings trying to enjoy the years we have left. I learned this from my nephew, Curtis. Not a bad young man at heart, lazy sometimes, careless certainly, but charming enough that everybody kept giving him second chances. He drifted from job to job for years. Whenever something went wrong, there was always an explanation. The manager was unfair. The economy was difficult. His co-workers were jealous. Nothing was ever truly his fault. One winter he asked if he could stay with me, temporarily. That word has trapped many old people. At first it seemed harmless. He'd help around the house, find work, save a little, move out within a month or 2. That was the plan. But weeks turned into months. Dirty dishes piled up. Bills increased. My peaceful routines disappeared. I started waking up irritated in my own home. One afternoon I came back from a doctor's appointment and found him asleep on the couch at 3 in the afternoon, empty beer bottles on the table beside him. Meanwhile, I had spent that entire morning worrying about my own blood pressure results and whether my heart medication needed changing. And I had a thought that shook me. Why was I spending the final chapter of my life carrying a grown man who refused to carry himself? That hurt to admit, because our generation was taught endurance. Help family no matter what. Sacrifice quietly. Keep giving even when exhausted. But there is a difference between helping somebody through hardship and enabling a pattern that never ends. So I sat Curtis down one evening and calmly told him he needed to leave within 30 days. No yelling, no cruelty, just honesty. He acted shocked, hurt even. But deep down, I knew I'd waited far too long already. After he left, my home finally felt like mine again. The silence returned. The peace returned. And I mean this literally, not as a figure of speech. Even my health improved, because stress has a heavier effect on old bodies than most people realize. This is the one I promised you at the start. This is the one that nearly cost me. I think about that afternoon on the couch more than I'd like to admit. Not with anger at Curtis, he was doing exactly what the arrangement had taught him he was allowed to do. I was the one who kept extending temporarily past its honest meaning. If there's one thing I'd want a younger version of myself to hear, it's this. A boundary you state once and never enforce isn't a boundary, it's a suggestion. And people who need boundaries the most are usually the ones least likely to respect a suggestion. If that story means anything to you, hit like right now. Not for me, for whoever in your life needs to see this tonight. This last one may sound smaller than manipulation or narcissism or criticism, but I genuinely believe chronic ingratitude can wound the human heart over time in its own quiet way. When you spend your life giving sincerely to others, and your kindness is constantly treated as something expected, you eventually begin feeling emotionally invisible. Ungrateful people rarely say thank you in any way that means something. Nothing is ever enough. If you give time, they focus on what you didn't give. If you offer help, they complain about how it was done. If you sacrifice for them, they behave as though you merely fulfilled an obligation. And after enough years around people like that, generosity starts turning into resentment. I remember a woman from my church group, Vivian. Every Christmas, I used to drive several seniors around town to look at holiday lights, since many of them could no longer drive safely at night. I loved doing it. It brought me real happiness, watching older faces light up like children again. But Vivian criticized every single outing. Too cold, too crowded, too slow, wrong neighborhood, wrong restaurant afterward. One year I spent nearly 6 hours organizing a small dinner for the group, and the only thing she said afterward was that the mashed potatoes were dry. I drove home that night feeling strangely empty, not angry, just tired. And somewhere along that road I understood something important. Gratitude is emotional oxygen. Human beings need appreciation the way plants need sunlight, especially older people, because so many of us already feel discarded by the world around us. A simple, sincere thank you can warm an aging heart more than most people realize. After that, I stopped overextending myself for people who treated kindness casually, and I invested that same energy into relationships where care actually flowed both ways. Life became lighter because of it. I'll add one more thing about Vivian because it changed how I understood the whole pattern. Months later, I found out almost by accident that she genuinely looked forward to those nights. A relative mentioned she talked about them all year. She simply never once said so to me. I don't think she meant any harm by it. I think for whatever reason in her own life, gratitude had just never been modeled as something you say out loud. That didn't make it hurt less at the time. But it taught me that ingratitude isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's just a language somebody was never taught to speak, and either way, you're allowed to stop paying the cost of translating for them. When you're young, you think life is mostly about achievement, building a career, raising children, paying a mortgage, chasing goals. When you get old, your definition of a good life changes completely. Peace becomes wealth. A calm morning becomes a luxury. A stress-free afternoon becomes more valuable than impressing anybody. And the people around you matter more than almost anything else because they either protect your spirit or they slowly drain it. I don't hate any of the people I've talked about tonight. Truly, I don't. Some of them probably carried wounds I never fully understood. But age teaches you something important. Compassion does not require unlimited access. You can love people while still protecting yourself from the damage they cause. That lesson took me nearly 80 years to learn properly. So if somebody in your life constantly leaves you anxious, exhausted, guilty, invisible, or emotionally small, even if that person is family, Even if you've loved them your whole life, please don't ignore that feeling any longer. At our age, peace is not a luxury, it is necessary. Protect your remaining years, protect your heart, protect the quiet little joys that still make life beautiful. And if nobody has told you this lately, let this old man say it to you now. You are still allowed to choose yourself. Even when it means walking away from someone familiar, even when it means family. If tonight helped you see something clearly, subscribe and tell me in the comments which of the 5 you're going to start protecting yourself from this week. I read every one of them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope these words brought you a little comfort and maybe a little clarity. Take good care of yourself. I'll see you again very soon.